All right, so you're here with us on the deep dive because you're all about getting to the heart of things without wading through all the fluff, right? You want that knowledge and you want it fast.
That's it. No time to waste.
Exactly. And today we're looking at something I bet most of you do every single night, bedtime screen time.
Oh, yeah, that familiar glow in the dark.
But we're going deeper than just blue light bad. We've got some serious data to dissect thanks to a massive study out of Norway.
Huge study. They look at over 45,000 young adults, all tracking their screen habits right before bed.
45,000, that's a lot of people. That's going to give us some solid insights into how those phones, tablets, whatever it is we're glued to at night are actually messing with our sleep.
Messing with it big time, potentially.
Yeah, so the big question we're going to tackle together today is this. What's the real deal with bedtime screen time? And more importantly, what can we actually do to sleep better?
And what's really cool is that we're not just relying on some general advice or hunches here. We're diving into a full-on scientific study, freshly published in Frontiers in Psychiatry on March 31st, 2025.
So hot off the press.
Hot off the press, yeah. And all of the findings, all the details we're going to discuss, it's all straight from that research.
Straight from the source. Now, I'm willing to bet that a lot of you listening are thinking, okay, screen's bad for sleep, heard it all before. But this study actually flips the script on some of those assumptions we've all got.
It does. It makes you rethink things. Like, is doom scrolling on social media really the ultimate sleep killer?
Right. We're going to find out. Get ready for some surprising takeaways and the best part, some actual things you can try tonight to get a better night's sleep.
Let's get into it.
Let's do it. All right, hit me with those big headline findings. What did this study actually uncover?
So the most significant finding, the one that really jumps out, is this. There's a really strong connection between using screens after you've already gotten into bed and the negative impacts on your sleep. Like, the researchers found that just 1 extra hour, that's all it takes, 1 extra hour of screen time once you're tucked in, that leads to almost a 60% increase in the risk of insomnia.
Whoa, almost 60%. That's huge. So every hour you're scrolling or watching, you're basically rolling the dice on whether you develop a serious sleep disorder.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And it's not just about feeling a little sleepy the next day. This is linked to clinically diagnosed insomnia.
Okay, so this is serious stuff. And it didn't stop there, did it? I mean, that extra hour of screen time, it wasn't just linked to insomnia, right?
Right, it wasn't just the insomnia. They also found that extra hour was associated with an average reduction of 24 minutes of sleep every night.
24 minutes per night. Doesn't sound like a lot, but over time, that adds up. That's a lot of lost sleep.
Oh, yeah. A lot of lost sleep.
Yeah.
And, it's important to highlight, this isn't about going to bed later. It's about stealing from your total sleep time.
Exactly. And the study pinpoints this screen use after we're already in bed when we're supposed to be winding down. That seems super important.
It is. It really highlights that time when you've decided, okay, time for sleep. You're in your sleep sanctuary, your bed, lights are out maybe, but you're still staring at that screen.
Still staring away. And this is where it gets really interesting because the lead researcher on the study, Dr. Gunhild Johnson-Chetland, she had a really key observation about the types of screen activities we're doing.
Oh, yeah, that was fascinating.
Because I think we all have our own little theories, right? Like, we assume that arguing about politics on social media is going to be way worse than, I don't know, watching a rerun of a sitcom. What did they actually find about the different types of screen activities?
It's so true. And the researchers themselves, they were curious about that exact thing too. Is it the content that's the culprit? But what Dr. Jetland found, and this might be a surprise, is that the differences in negative impacts between those different activities, like social media versus watching something, weren't that significant.
Huh. So maybe all that late night scrolling isn't the devil we thought it was.
Maybe not. It's not that black and white. Her main takeaway was that the total amount of time spent on screens while you're in bed, that seems to be the real driving force.
Interesting. So whether you're lost in TikTok or trying to squeeze in one more episode, the actual duration is what matters most.
Bingo. And the researchers think a big part of that is what they call time displacement, which basically means the time you're spending on your screen is time you're not spending sleeping.
Makes perfect sense. We only have so many hours in a night. Okay, so when they say screen use in this study, what exactly were these young adults doing?
So they were pretty specific. They asked about watching shows or movies, playing video games, of course, social media, just surfing the internet, listening to audio like podcasts or music. And get this, even reading study-related materials on a screen.
Even schoolwork on a screen in bed. Surprising.
It is. It really seems to point to the light the engagement, the delay of sleep, all playing a part. And again, what's really interesting is that the negative impact on how much sleep people got, it didn't really change much depending on what they were doing, as long as they accounted for that total time spent glued to the screen.
The screen time is the common denominator. Okay, so we know what they were doing, and we know the total time seems to be the main culprit. But how did they actually measure sleep in this study? And how did they define insomnia?
Good question. So they collected all the sleep data through surveys, self-reported by the participants. They asked about their usual bedtime, wake-up time, how long it took them to fall asleep, and how often they had trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. They also asked about how sleepy they felt during the day and how long those sleep problems had been going on.
So it's all based on what the participants themselves reported. Interesting.
Yep, self-reported. And for insomnia, they used very specific criteria. They classified someone as having insomnia if they reported trouble sleeping and daytime sleepiness at least 3 times a week for at least 3 months.
So a pretty strict definition to make sure they were looking at true insomnia and not just a bad night here and there.
Absolutely. Had to be consistent. Now, remember how we talked about that assumption that social media is the ultimate sleep stealer?
Yeah, that social media is uniquely bad for sleep.
This study actually challenged that.
It did. What
Yeah.
happened there?
Well, the researchers thought that social media would have a much stronger link to bad sleep. Because it's so interactive, all those notifications, the potential for heated discussions, the fear of missing out, all that stuff.
It definitely sounds like a recipe for a restless night.
It does. But what they found was that the data didn't really show a stronger connection. When they compared social media to other screen activities, like watching videos or browsing, the negative effects were pretty similar when they looked at the total time spent.
Interesting. So it might not be the kind of content that's keeping us awake, but just the fact that we're engaged with a screen, period.
Exactly. And this really changes how we think about our bedtime habits. So if you think about it, if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture here, sleep is essential for, basically everything. Our physical and mental health depend on it.
No doubt. We all feel it after a bad night's sleep. Can't focus, cranky, and those sugar cravings are intense.
Right. And for the group in this study, young adults, sleep is even more crucial. It's super important for how they learn, their moods, their overall well-being. And the study points out that sleep problems are already super common among students.
Which makes sense considering all the pressure they're under with studies, social life, figuring out their future.
Exactly. It's a lot to juggle. And when you don't sleep well, it can snowball. It affects their mental health, their grades, their whole quality of life. So understanding how screen time is contributing to this, it's really important.
It's important. Okay, so we get the problem. Screens in bed equal less sleep. But let's dig a little deeper into the why. How are these screens messing with our sleep?
Well, there are a few ways it happens. First off, and we touched on this earlier, those notifications, they're little sleep saboteurs, that sudden ping when you're drifting off, or even in the middle of the night. Instant alertness.
Ugh, tell me about it. Those late night pings are the worst.
Right. And then there's that big takeaway from this study, time displacement. Every minute, every hour you spend scrolling, watching whatever, that's time you're not resting, not getting ready for sleep.
It's pretty simple. More screen time equals less sleep time.
Simple math, yeah. And then we've got to think about the content itself. Even if it's not super stimulating or upsetting, you get caught up in a story or a game, your mind stays active, and that makes it harder to wind down.
You get invested, suddenly an hour's gone by, and it's way past bedtime.
Happens all the time. And then last but not least, the light from our screens. That blue light, it messes with our natural sleep-wake cycle, our circadian rhythm. It blocks that sleep hormone, melatonin, so our brain thinks it's still daytime.
So it's like a multi-pronged attack on our sleep. Notifications, lost sleep time, the content keeping our minds buzzing, and the light messing with our body's natural sleep cues. Makes sense why this is such a big deal.
It does. So based on all of this, what can we actually do about it?
Yeah, what's the practical advice here?
Well, Dr. Jitland had a pretty straightforward suggestion. If you think your screen time might be contributing to sleep problems, cut back on it. Ideally, she recommends ditching the screens at least 30 to 60 minutes before bed. Give your mind and body a chance to chill out.
Create a buffer zone between the digital world and sleep. Sounds like a good plan, though I'll admit, easier said than done.
It is, for sure, but worth trying. And the researchers also suggest disabling notifications, especially in the hour or two before bed and while you're sleeping. No more surprise pings.
Love that. Out of sight, out of sound, hopefully a much more peaceful sleep. Now, it's important to remember that every study has its limitations.
Oh, absolutely. Context is everything.
So what should we keep in mind about this particular study?
Okay, so first off, this study focused on young adults in Norway. Really valuable data for that group and that culture. But sleep and screen habits might be different in other age groups or cultures.
So the findings might not apply to everyone across the globe.
Right. Second, when they were comparing social media to other activities, they lumped some pretty different things together. Like listening to calming music got grouped with playing a super intense video game. So those nuances might get lost in the comparison.
Yeah, all screen time is not created equal, even if the total time matters most.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that this study can't definitively prove cause and effect. It shows a strong link, yes, but maybe people who already have trouble sleeping are just more likely to use screens in bed to pass the time.
It's that chicken or the egg dilemma. Does screen time cause sleep problems, or do people with sleep problems use screens more?
Precisely. And lastly, this study relied on self-reported data. So it's not as precise as, say, measuring brainwaves in a sleep lab.
So it's relying on people's own assessment of their sleep habits.
That's right. But even with these limitations, the sheer size of this study and the consistent findings, it's still incredibly valuable.
It gives us a big red flag and some clear areas to think about when it comes to our sleep.
Absolutely. Okay, so to sum it all up, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive?
Well, it seems pretty clear. The more time we spend on screens in bed, no matter what we're doing, the higher the risk of insomnia and the less sleep we get.
That's it in a nutshell. And the advice that flows from that is pretty simple. Cut back on screen time before bed. Ideally, none at all. It might be the key to sleeping better and feeling better.
Exactly. Time to prioritize sleep. Those seemingly harmless minutes on our devices could be costing us big time when it comes to our health and well-being. So here's something to think about.
Okay, hit us with it.
What's one small change you can make to your screen routine tonight that might help you sleep better tomorrow? And if you could get back those average 24 minutes of lost sleep, what could you do with that extra time over time? Worth considering.
Really worth considering.
Think about what we've talked about, look at your own habits, and see if you're inspired to make some changes. Because even tiny tweaks can make a huge difference in how well we sleep.